Yes, welcome. This is A RAP CRITIC. I'm your boy Malik 16, founder and creator of Plates and Crates. And no, sometimes I don't brag like Hov, but all the time I'm real like Pac. So, this happens to be the very first by request episode. Mr. Devin Scurry or Devon Scurry, one of our viewers, correct me if I said your name wrong. We're going over the album Born Sinner by J. Cole. I'm glad we get to honor this request. This album was requested to be reviewed last spring, and I made it a point that I would come to this as soon as we were done with our 1996 All Year campaign, and we're done. This is the first new video of the new year. We're coming back fresh. You see the crates in the back. Got new stuff in the merch store coming. RapRuler.com is up and running. Go visit. We're gonna have the app coming very soon. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how this works, please take some time to acquaint yourself with the system, the Rap Ruler system that we use here. Go check out the RapRuler.com, and that's where you can find out how to go rank and rate albums using the website. And if you don't choose to, you can do so in the comments below. And continue to like and subscribe to the channel. It's real. I hope y'all had a great year. Let's jump into it. This is gonna be category 1, the product itself. Now, first dimension that we go over when we're talking about category 1 is the quality of the production. And so on this album, you know, one of the things that seems to be evident is J. Cole's hunger to showcase and let people know that he's got range of production. He mentioned in articles leading up to the album that it was definitely going to contain some songs that were left over from his debut album, The Sideline Story. He also made it a point, you know, when he was releasing mixtape and little promo EPs leading up to this, that some of those songs would end up as the 3rd EP installment, and those wound up being the bonus songs on here if you have the deluxe version. If you don't, then it ends with the title track. But if you have the deluxe version, which most people I think are familiar with, it has about 4 or 5 extra songs. Now you feature some additional or co-production on this album by the likes of Elite and Science, who are 2 producers that he worked with on his mixtape series and on his debut album. And then you also get a co-production credit here from Jake One, who is really well known, whose name rings bells throughout the underground scene. He's got a very soulful take on production, and I think every now and then on the songs with co-production, it tends to be a little bit more lushness to the sonic bed. There's more musicality overall. So this album benefits from those injections of soul, because it could wind up, you know, getting lost in its own ambition. And that's what I would say about the production here. It's very ambitious. You can tell J. Cole was seeking to impress and show some semblance of growth between the first album to this one. And I think this early in his career, a lot of things weren't as polished or seasoned as the J. Cole that we've come to know as the face of the new rap Mount Rushmore, right? So I feel like it becomes no more evident than any amount of samples that are prominent on this album. So the first song, Voluminati, which samples several things. The chanting, you get the James Fauntleroy singing in the background, and you know, you're playing with pitches and octaves, and you know, he goes up tempo, he's going for this eventful feeling. Cool, he's checking all the boxes of a classic hip hop album, right? It's supposed to feel like dramatic, and you're supposed to, you know, come out the gate with energy. He does that. It's great to see. Not many one-man shows can boast having that wide range of sounds. To hear a beat like Power Trip, which is a very strong beat, it's got the Human Laws jazz sample in the back, but it's mostly this electro bass that leads it. And there's breakdowns where the beat slows and it goes back up, and he creates a beat that is made for radio, mostly because of, you know, the vocal performance on it, but because of that bass line, it survived a second life to be, you know, kind of club worthy too. So this This song had life on radio and club, while it gave a much needed dose of newness and crispness on this album early into it. That's not easy to pull off. And then there's also there's a really, really clever sampling that comes on the song Let Nas Down, where the saxophone solo, which is pretty much an acapella stripped down sax solo, no other instruments playing, from a famous Fela Kuti song called Gentleman from the 70s, is used the same way that No ID used saxophone instrumentation on Jay-Z's Death of Auto-Tune, with like this boom bap 90s bass line. Producers would think it's lazy because it's an open space to sample from, and he didn't do much to it. But to blend it with the kind of drum and bass line that he did, it shows out of the box thinking, even though it was heavily inspired from what another producer did on another song. But it fits the mood. It sounds like something Nas would have rapped over too. And it really, really works well together. That is creative sampling, and that's what, you know, hip-hop fans and hip-hop purists really expect, and fellow producers expect when you're going to borrow from another song, another piece of art, or another piece of work. And then it's just an album full of blatant sample rips, and that is the definition of the cheat code. But maybe some of the songs he sampled a little too early, right? So, you know, throughout, you're getting different sounds, but when you trace them back to their original songs, it's like, oh, Cole, what did you really do production-wise to these tracks besides add some drums behind it? Timbaland-inspired drums at that. So, for example, you know, a song like Rich Niggas, the electro, you know, or ambient techno pop song that's sampled from, he literally just takes the beginning notes of that song, adds some basic stutter drums to it, and you know, that is your beat. We get that same effect with Chaining Day. So this is where Cole shines the most, when he taps into these soulful productions that sound fuller, because the more hollow, empty productions sound less inspired. That throws us to She Knows, which directly rips a song by the Colts. He doesn't change anything really with the drums. He just reinforces the drums that are already there. The song that comes right after Voluminati, which is Land of the Snakes, J. Cole just rips the Art of Storytelling Part 1 from Outkast and just raps over it. And then the idea of touching the same sample, Mystic Brew, by Ronnie Foster, that was used famously on Electric Relaxation by A Tribe Called Quest. We've heard, you know, plenty of people sample more current popular songs from hip hop history. Tory Lanez has made a career off of it. Now, in recent years, hip hop sampling in particular has been done in ways that breathe new life into classic songs. Because if you're gonna touch a classic, you have to be bringing something extraordinary to it. You know, I've heard, you know, Travis Scott sample Cell Therapy by Goody Mob. I've heard Drake sample Back That Ass Up by Juvenile. I've heard Fab sample My Lifestyle by Fat Joe. But in all of those examples I gave, there were reimaginings of all of those songs where it becomes this new thing. You know, for instance, you know, Drake turns the Juvenile song into this kind of slowed down R&B-ish thing. Travis Scott turns the Goody Mob song into its own, you know, kind of creepy combination. And then, you know, Fab makes a trap rendition of the My Lifestyle beat and song. We're talking about two beloved songs in the history, in the annals of hip hop, that, you know, most people would agree don't need to be touched. It's like somebody, you know, remaking Who Shot Ya. It's like, no, leave these beloved hip hop beats with their respective songs and put them in a time capsule, and that's it. Unless you're gonna do something dynamically new. But what we're hearing is kind of the same use. It's being sampled the same way it was sampled in the way that made it famous as a hip hop song in the first place. The tempo, he doesn't change the pacing, he doesn't add new elements from the original sample. J. Cole's production doesn't add anything new when he does Land of the Snakes or Forbidden Fruit, and it doesn't build upon the legacy created by Outkast and A Tribe Called Quest. And then you get some people who really live by what was done over those beats because of the nostalgia and familiarity, but more often than not, those are people who are only vaguely familiar with the original songs and more familiar with Cole's versions. And derivative is probably a word that fits in here when we talk about the quality of production. It's lively and there's elements of lushness, but most of it is derivative. As original as it tries to be, it doesn't introduce anything, new. There's a difference between paying homage and just kind of just doing something over. And that's what happens here. And then the only bona fide original production here comes from the outside producers, comes from Science and Jake One with Mo Money and Ain't That Some Ish. And the Science beat sounds a little dated, actually, even by the time this album debuted. That beat sounds like something that would have been out in the early 2000s where the bounce rap was really popular. And these both turn up as skit songs that are less than 2 minutes long, a minute, maybe a minute and change, and they come and go. And so maybe for those reasons. But you could argue that Crooked Smile and its sample of a Jennifer Hudson song sees Cole at least rearranging parts a little bit more. So these Jennifer Hudson and the Colt songs came out within years of each other. So they're not like older songs. So it's a really interesting choice. But what he does with the vocals from Jennifer Hudson is uses it very subtly and in ways that add color to the beat as it builds up and samples. Because these are just simple piano progressions, but it's layered, and that's what's missing from a lot of songs. So a shining track on here is Runaway because it builds up with musicality the more the song progresses. By the time you get to the final verse, the way it breaks down, the instruments that are taken in and added, and then how it leads out, it's just really like, oh, okay, now we're doing something. And again, it has that soulfulness. So you're getting soulfulness on Chaining Day, you're getting soulfulness on Runaway, and unfortunately, it's on the other production for the deluxe songs that some people didn't get as the main album and may not count. So it's on like New York Times. Cole is doing boom bap drums instead, these dusty boom bap drums over these real hypnotic and melodious sounds that fit the tone of that song and what's being talked about. So the boom bap drums just sound the most hip hop of all the tracks on there, and you almost wish for more of that. Sparks Will Fly, it's just so ready to go. Again, the outside production, which comes from Christian Rich on the song Sparks Will Fly, give a little glimpse of what could have been. It's a shame that it wasn't a single because that had enough knock and enough of those familiar elements for radio play and just head nod quality. And it's like, oh, maybe that is the answer, having a little bit more outside production. Interesting, something for you all to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. The quality of the production on this album takes us to dimension 2, the cohesiveness of the sonic bed. Okay, so how well does it all go together? I think that's what we're getting at here. The idea that if you hear these songs individually, they're strong, and then you hear them together and they might do something to each other. If this is an album with songs that he wanted to get out on the first album that he couldn't, there's also going to be this feeling of, I really want y'all to get these songs. Even if they don't necessarily fit here, I want you to get them. And so it winds up having a similar feel as a mixtape. J. Cole made his name by releasing these like legendary mixtapes. And that comes, there's a little spoiledness that comes from being given that much creative license to do all of your production, especially when you're coming out the gate. It always blew my mind how J. Cole was given that carte blanche to produce most of his debut album. So of course, his sophomore album, he's gonna have that same freedom. And if he's using holdover songs from the old album, these are things that he just wanted you to hear. Here's another song to show how I can produce. I can produce with chants, I can produce with strings, I can produce with these electro drums, I can produce with these harpsichords, I can sample. That's kind of what you're getting here. It's stockpiled stuff instead of here's why this song came right after this song. And that's what it is. It's super eclectic. It's showcasing J. Cole's ear, you know, as a producer, and his versatility as a rapper to rap over different beats. The question is, do they go together? There's no real flow to how one song goes into another. And I think moments stand out more than others on this album because some of the production is lazy. You know, those easy samples tend to be a little lazy. There's a lot of Timbaland influence in the drums, and you hear that. And because the tones are all so different, they just kind of jump to each other. It doesn't help that a lot of the songs cut off abruptly, so it just goes one song, next. No real melding, no blending. They're just there. I think a lot of that has to do with sequencing. When we talk about cohesiveness, where these songs are placed. Some of those songs that were the bonus on the deluxe could have made their way into the main album work, and then some of those short songs and some of those repetitive songs could have been done as bonus songs, vice versa. And even split up a little, even just reshuffled differently would have gave this album a different feel and tone. There's just different offerings of J. Cole's style as a rapper and a producer. And that has an effect on the cohesiveness, and that's something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to the next dimension, dimension 3, the question of, is there an intentional mood and tone on this album? And this is where it gets a little interesting because you could argue, yeah, there's an intentional mood. Was it executed, or how well was it executed? It's a different question. I've heard J. Cole be quoted as saying his mixtape series were all within the idea of him being this once NBA hopeful, right? This college basketball star. So everything had a sports theme. The come up, the warm up, Friday Night Lights, and then the debut album being the sideline story. So he's quoted as saying he felt like Born Sinner was the beginning of a new chapter. He closed the whole sports reference chapter. He made it into the majors, and now this is more where he's at. But what exactly he's trying to get at with the duplicity, the dichotomy of being a born sinner, and you see the imagery on the album cover of this like horn figure with a halo, it's not ever made super clear through any major tie-in. I don't think there's any solid point on the album where you feel like, oh, J. Cole is struggling between being this saint-like person or this like devilish-like person, or he's battling vices. If vices are women, cool, because there's a lot of talk about that all on this album. And he even asks, you know, a poignant question in the middle of the album. They say, you know, everybody's man is all men are made in God's image. Is it true? Even this, even that, you know, even a killer. You kind of got to glean it from an art as interpretation perspective. Like, oh yeah, I can see it. You know, I'm sure super fans of J. Cole will be able to say, oh, I can see how the duality was displayed on the album, but there's not anything that clearly threads that. And I think it's just an easy phrase to title an album that sounds prolific, and that's something that I think happens throughout the album. There's this ironic mention of Nas comparisons, and I think the Nas comparisons started from the mixtapes, and I think there are a lot of ways you can compare J. Cole to Nas on this album, but not in career ways, more performance ways, and then we'll talk more about that in category 2. So when we talk about 2014 Forest Hills Drives, the theme that we touched on was this freedom theme, this I'm going to follow my heart and just kind of be. And Cole, as much as he boasts of just being himself and being free, it still seems like he's improving mode. And that's indicated by some of the things that he does all throughout the album. Even from the production standpoint. Look at my beats, look at my production, look how different, and I want you to hear all these clever samples and how much of a student of hip hop I am. It's like a kid with all of his toys that he didn't get to show you the first go around. Here's the rest of my collection. That seems to be the underlying tone here. It's hard to characterize it as hunger because it sounds more like proving. He's rhyming with the same, ferocity and intent, but it seems a little aimless, a little directionless. And so the moodier, again, he says in the beginning, it's gonna be darker this time. I don't know if you get darkness from this album. I don't know if the themes are any darker than the first album. I don't know if his beats are any darker than the first album. And he's not lyrically doing anything that's darker than the first album, or, so it's interesting that he said that. Maybe he was going through dark times when he wrote this personally, but not one theme that I picked up on or that I think is easy to pick up on that you could say, oh, this is the theme of the album. And I'm sure it can be argued that because you get these church references, these choir moments in songs, or these skits that have to do with religion in between here and there. I think there's like 3 of them that's supposed to be what ties it all together, but they are just not strong enough, or they don't seem strong enough to do that, or they're not consistent enough. 3 on an album that has, almost 18 songs, or 17 if you count the bonus tracks. It's a 12-song album if we're just boiling it down strictly to songs, but those skits aren't potent enough to tie anything together. I think more than anything, you get this projected confidence from Cole. He mentions Jay-Z a few times. There's a little bit of insecurity talk that comes out when he's talking about himself in the industry and where he sees himself. So this is still an earlier J. Cole. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats that takes us to dimension 4. The repetition of words and sounds versus song distinction. So song distinction versus repetition. It gets pretty repetitive, not so much because J. Cole runs out of words. J. Cole is a word crafter. He knows what he's doing with his words. Some albums are repetitive in a very obvious and blatant way. You heard us review Chris Cross's album or Ghetto Boy's album, where those things are just obvious. They just have very limited things to talk about, and it shows. And production gets very redundant. Then you get these albums that are more cleverly repetitious and redundant, and it means that you really have to be in tune. You have to be a hip-hop head, a hip-hop listener, or someone who pays a lot of attention to detail, or maybe really into the artist to really notice, like, whoa. And so this album is sneakily redundant and repetitious. And I mentioned the Nas comparisons, and J. Cole is most like Nas in that he is an excellent storyteller, but he's also very much like Nas in that he'll storytell on songs that lead off as brag rap songs. So the only pure brag rap song on here is the intro of Illuminati, and he has this tendency to do these songs where he's just boasting, and then the next verse he'll just be telling a story. And most of the stories are going to be narratives about women that he encounters, either good or bad. A woman he knows, a woman he used to know, a woman he ran into, a woman he's dealing with. and that will be your second verse. The whole first verse, he's dissing rappers, and then for no reason he breaks out into this story, or 2 verses are dedicated to the story about this woman, woman X. There's actually a lull. There's a moment in the middle of the album where 5 songs, no less than 5 songs, run into each other, and they're all about the same kind of thing. It's all him talking about women. So from the end of Land of the Snakes, where he goes into that final verse and he's talking about the young lady who he played, who plays him back, it's just all, you get these moments in between. I think Rich Niggas and Mo Money are meant to kind of break that up, but it's already done, because you got Power Trip, Trouble, Runaway, and then there's a little break, but then right after that, Forbidden Fruit, She Knows. By the time you get to songs later on, and like if you have the deluxe version and it's Is She Gonna Pop, it's like, I done heard you say everything you can say about women, and it doesn't help that women are all the B word on this album. Where Cole is not doing the same thing that we mentioned on Razzcast's album Solo Nice. In our review, we mentioned how Raz never refers to women outside of the B word. We've seen a lot of rappers do that. All women are B words, but some get away with it because some come on with a pimp persona. Some are gangster rappers. It's understandable because they're talking about one shade of woman for the duration of the album. The issue here is that we know better. We know that Cole knows the differences between different types of women and different shades of women and how they're to be categorized. He just chooses on this album to call them all the B word, even though he's talking about them differently on different songs. So you can argue that's a poor choice, but it seems to me like that was a default kind of compensation choice. Like, hey, I'm not a gangster rapper, I'm not a backpacker. This is my way of reminding you that I'm still, you know, a dude. I'm still a tough individual that shouldn't be tested. So the B word's gonna be my aggressive curse word of choice. After a while, it's like, it's his go-to curse word. It almost feels like, again, more that proving. And he even kind of has a meta reference to that on the song Forbidden Fruit, where he's like, he keeps saying the B word in a high pitch. He's like, oh, that's gonna be my new ad-lib, even though there's already several rappers who have that as an ad-lib. And then he just keeps saying it at the end of the song, and it's like, okay, Cole, we get it. You curse. This is your word. You're not a punk. And these are different ways that women do different things. These are the decisions you've made with different women. These are the questions that were in your head as you were making these decisions. But it becomes, you know, easily overwhelming, where it's like, does Cole have anything more to talk about? And it seems like the easy answer is no. Again, this is not the seasoned Cole that we've come to know as the leader of the new school. This is a Cole still trying to figure it out, and it may, you know, be, you know, this is just a theory, but it may be an idea that when one of the downsides to releasing mixtape after mixtape to build your rep up before your debut album is that you kind of run out of source material. He's now tasted fame. He had a successful debut album. He's in the rap game. People know his name. He's got new things to talk about, but that still runs short because he's still not too far from being that guy he was when he was making his debut album. So he's running off of those narratives and then this new shorter narrative of the things he's seen within the past 2 years of being a rap star. And that's the extent of, you know, where things go here, and that's where you get the redundancy. It's like women, 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 women. You're gonna hear a lot of that. So there's the redundancy in the themes, redundancy in that particular word, and some tracks do sound the same. I think the more chiming, melodious samples he uses start sounding similar. Some of the chanty beats sound similar. It's like, how many different ways can you use chants? And also, as we mentioned, the influence of those Timbaland drums find their way on most songs. So I don't know if the casual listener pick up on it, but from the very first song to, you know, the songs before the last, you're getting at. It's not until you get to those deluxe version songs where you get a little bit more drum experimentation, and to think that these are songs that may not have made it is very interesting. But those jumble drums is what I call them, that Timbaland has famously made his trademark, are very, very much borrowed from Cole on here. And overall, not too much redundancy, but redundancy definitely makes its appearance and settles right in the middle of the album to kind of weigh it down. That's your repetition on this album, and it's something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5, the amount of content versus the amount of songs. I mentioned before, 12 songs on this album. If you count the deluxe version, that takes it up to about 17. And you're not gonna be without content on the J. Cole album. Content is part of J. Cole's whole image and whole legacy or presence in this game. And so on this album, you're getting songs like Crooked Smile, you're getting songs like Chain and Day, you're getting songs like Mo Money, Rich Niggas. So you get these focused moments like Chain and Day, where he's making a commentary on the superficiality of the hip hop game, or superficiality of black people, and trying to keep up even though he's at heart a simple man. I think that song is probably the most telling when we talk about the theme and mood. That is J. Cole in a nutshell. This album is still J. Cole trying to impress, when deep down, he's cool with a t-shirt and making message music, but you know, I gotta throw a B word in there to make y'all listen, and I gotta make all of these referential callback moments and sing-song hooks and beats so y'all, you know, nod your head. There's no shortage of content on this album for 12 songs, even though they're redundant themes. But that's something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Now, dimension 6, features. On this album, you have Miguel. You also have Amber Kaufman on the song She Knows. You also have James Fauntleroy, and these are all people providing vocals on the album. The Jhené Aiko song, Sparks Will Fly, would have definitely got radio play. This was the burgeoning period for Jhené coming up, and it just would have been a nice look. But also the song with 50 and Boss would have fit so well in the middle of the album to break up some of that monotony. The content and the mood of that song is different. It's one of the more hip hop songs on there. And of course, most standout, Kendrick Lamar featured on the song Forbidden Fruit, which will go down in history as one of the greatest missed opportunities. A lot of fans are split on this. They either love it because it's just an accented sprinkling of Kendrick and a warm-up because it's the same year that Kendrick released his debut album, Good Kid, Mad City, which wound up getting way more unanimous critical reviews from the gate and fan response, instead of it being this polarizing response, right? And you either love it for that accenting and sprinkling, or you hate it because you're like, why would you get Kendrick Lamar and not have him spit a verse on a song? Especially if y'all are gonna rap over Tribe Called Quest. Maybe Kendrick's presence as a rapper doing a verse on here would have given it this new life and justified this sample being revisited. But I do believe this is a song that gets mixed reviews in the history because people wanted to hear Kendrick rap on this. And I don't know if Kendrick rapping on this would have made it a dynamic collab, because when people hear two powerhouse rappers of this caliber get together, I don't think they want to hear them rap over Mystic Brew sample, Electric Relaxation. They want it over something more like the Illuminati intro beat. So, you know, him being the only major feature, the only rap feature on the plain version of this album had to be like a deflated effect for listeners. Kendrick just doing the weird voice chanty thing, not saying anything that was super melodious, just kind of, again, anyone could have said what Kendrick was saying. So it's like a few lines, weird voice, you know, it's one of those you gotta have a taste for it kind of things. Why would you use the most anticipated rapper as a feature and not have him rap? I'm sure Cole wanted to make a statement by doing that, but I don't know if all the listeners were in on it. On the flip side of that, the guest feature of 50 Cent was perfectly used for a hook because one, 50 is well known for his hook making. That is one of his strong points, and his presence on here is very strong because of that hook. He makes the song, he generates a mood and a tone, and he has a lot more words and lines. Boss being on here is one of Boss's best early career performances. He comes and adds a layer of, a little bit of roughness to it, but matches Cole in tone as far as what's being talked about and position. And nobody overshines anyone on here. And so that's a great example of how guests could be used. And it sounds like Cole could have afforded at least a few more rap features to really break up some of that monotony that was caused by the sequencing. It was said that Nas was supposed to be originally featured on there with 50, so you couldn't get Nas, so you got Boss. Hey, Queens in the building. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 7, the question of, does the weakest song or do the weakest songs on this album take away from it? And it's always up to you what you consider the weakest song to be. Maybe some of those songs in the middle all about women and stories about interactions with women weigh you down. You feel like they're weak. Maybe you don't like the beats on some of them. I mentioned the one track produced by Science Completely. Ain't That Some Ish? That kind of just sounds a little outdated. You might think that's the weakest song. Maybe you don't like the singers on certain songs, or maybe you are mad at that Kendrick Lamar feature and you feel like that's a weak moment. Something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 8, Mass Appeal. This album did great. This album only helped to solidify J. Cole's place in hip hop. It justified his rap stardom. It justified his place on the hip hop landscape. Gave him another strong, viable commercial hit with Power Trip. Crooked Smile kind of came and went. It got some radio play, it got some performance play, video play, and it just kind of went the way singles typically do. Midline singles go. But Power Trip resonated and lasted pretty long. Again, it had this radio life and this club life. The official third single from this album was She Knows. And in certain circles, that album had along like 2 stadium ready song because the cheat code was used. He's going off of whatever audience that original song by the Colts had, bringing it to a rap audience and going into a new kind of atmosphere, generating maybe more pop fans, maybe more mainstream listening fans because of that sound. So She Knows, maybe not hitting in the hip hop clubs like that, but hip hop listeners didn't seem to mind it, and it probably got J. Cole new fan base because of it. This album wound up going gold very early on. Coming out this week, it sold over 2,000 copies and came out the same week as Kanye West's Yeezus album. And there's a line on the Forbidden Fruit song. Cole says, hey, I might even drop the same day as Kanye just for competition. I don't want to disrespect the icons, but I want to test myself. And he winds up making it true. And, this was an interesting point in Kanye's career and an interesting point in Cole's career. So it's still a come up either way to even be in that same conversation. And he proved it. This album wound up going double platinum a decade later. And here we are talking about it, reviewing it, discussing it. Now, on it seems like there's something for everyone. Part of J. Cole trying and being in improving mode is that there are songs for everyone. There's songs like, Ain't That Some Ish and Niggas Know and, New York Times and the Illuminati. It sounds like he's trying to impress the typical rap fan. who only wants to hear street stuff or hard sounding stuff. Then he has this pop sounding stuff like Crooked Smile, She Knows, and Born Sinner. And then in between there, the nostalgic, the real hip hop heads, you got songs like Mo Money and Chaining Day and things that he really wants you to listen to, and Land of the Snakes and things like that. Miss America is interesting because he says he feels like it's a song that would never get played on the radio. It wound up being used for a video game or something, some different form of media. And I thought that was interesting that it still wound up getting used for something. And he was saying that it won't. So this is the beginning of J. Cole seeking other opportunities and branching out. Some would say this album is a chess move that he was better to execute later on. He got better at doing, but it set him up to do those things. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats takes us to my favorite dimension, Dimension 9, the 3 I's. Impact, innovation, influence. Now, when this album came out, he did more promo for it than was done for his first album because apparently J. Cole had more creative control than on his first album. So you had the 3 EPs that were supposed to be leading up to it. 2 of them came out before this album because the album date kept getting pushed back from the beginning of the year down to the summer, June, when it finally was released. And then he put the 3rd LP as the deluxe version, those last 5 tracks. And man, that's interesting promo. He went on tour for it. He also features Kendrick Lamar, while Kendrick Lamar is being the most talked about rapper of the year. And you know, there's things he did to affect the impact of it. Now, the influence shines because there's rappers, you know, you can see from Cole's Dreamfield Collective and some of their own words and some of their own verses where they mention growing up listening to Cole. This is one of the albums they were listening to. This is one of the albums to bump that year. A lot of rappers from the generation that has followed cite Cole as an influence, and these would be the albums. So you'll see the influence there, even though this is an album where Cole is showing his influences very blatantly. And then innovation, you know, using contemporary singles, I think, is a very interesting choice. Something that we started seeing rappers do more and more in mixtapes that became albums when we got into the streaming era. This is the beginning of the streaming era being dominant. And so Cole taking songs that were only 5 years or less, been out for 5 years or less, bold, daring choices to make. If you pick up on any other impact, influence, and innovation on this album, please let me know. Other than that, we'll move on to the final dimension, Dimension 10, the overall uniqueness, timelessness of this album and where it sits in the hip-hop classic history. Does it sound like other albums at its time? To be honest, it does sound like a lot of the albums that were coming out in the era, with the exception of some experimental choices that were made in production. There's not this like revolutionary creative outpouring coming from this album that makes it stand out. What makes it stand out is Cole himself, his brand of honesty in the midst of rappers either, you know, doubling down on the trap, you know, trap reemergence or auto-tune, and him being just kind of like, hey, this is me. Yeah. And so I mentioned before, this is an album that splits the audiences. Some people love it, some people feel like, yeah. Something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That has been your Category 1 breakdown of the classic Born Sinner by J. Cole. By request, join us for the second video, Category 2, where we go over the rap performance on this album. And if you have not already, take a moment to like and subscribe. Until then, y'all know what it is. This is how we start in the new year. Our first new video of 2022. We had to do it big. So shout out to all the Aquariuses. Tell a friend and tell a friend. Until next time, F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live in words of math.